What is the forgotten history of prison reform movements? Imagine a story where efforts to improve prisons actually helped expand their reach instead of making them better. That's the hidden side of prison reform history. It's a story full of twists and turns that many don't know. The first big push for reform in America started after the American Revolution in the early 1800s. Reformers like John Howard, William Wilberforce, and Elizabeth Fry believed prisons needed a moral makeover. They thought prisons could help people become better, not just punish them. They promoted ideas like work, silence, and discipline, which shaped systems like the Auburn prison and Pennsylvania models. These systems focused on labor and strict rules, inspired by Protestant beliefs and capitalist ideas. But here's the catch. While reformers claimed they were making prisons humane, they often ignored the brutal treatment of enslaved people and marginalized groups. Public punishments for enslaved people were still violent and public, showing a stark contradiction. So, even as reformers promoted kindness, racial violence and control persisted. Later, in the late 1800s, reform efforts like the Elmira Reformatory gained attention. Leaders like Alexander McConaughey introduced ideas about rehabilitation and parole, influencing laws in America and England. Yet, many of these reforms were short-lived. Prisons would adopt new ideas only to revert to old ways. Movements in the 1960s and 1970s shifted focus. Prisoners themselves started fighting for their rights, exposing abuses and organizing for change. Figures like George Jackson became symbols of this fight, linking prison struggles to broader social movements. The Attica prison riot in 1971 was a turning point. It showed prisoners were not just passive victims but active organizers demanding justice. This led to efforts like the National Institute of Corrections in 1974, aiming to improve prison management. But then came a wave of punitive laws. The 1984 Federal Crime Control Act ended parole, set mandatory minimum sentences, and brought back the death penalty. These laws rejected the idea of rehabilitation and doubled down on punishment. Looking back, the history shows that reform efforts often serve to legitimize and expand prisons rather than reduce their power. For example, after the Civil War, the convict leasing system in the South kept inmates working under brutal conditions, pretending to reform but actually continuing slavery-like practices. Modern prison abolition movements draw from this history, arguing that prisons mainly punish the poor and should be replaced with community-based programs. The story of prison reform is full of false starts and hidden agendas. It reveals how reforms can be used to justify more control rather than true change. When prisoners organize themselves, they often push for ideas more radical than what outsiders propose. This history reminds us that real change must come from those directly affected, not just reformers with their own agendas. Understanding this forgotten past helps us see how institutions absorb criticism and reform ideas while staying the same. It's a lesson that true justice might only come when the system itself is questioned and reimagined from the ground up.